Ava Sterling had earned her seat. As the CEO of Sterling Global Investments, she commanded respect in every boardroom. But 30,000 feet in the air on a transatlantic flight, her power meant nothing to a junior flight attendant who demanded she give up her first-class VIP seat for a white passenger who complained. Humiliated and furious, Ava complied. But little did the crew know they had just messed with the wrong woman. What happened in the next 5 minutes would send shockwaves through the airline industry and deliver a swift, hard dose of karma they never saw coming. Ava Sterling adjusted the plush cashmere blanket around her legs, the soft wool a small comfort against the simmering resentment that churned beneath her carefully composed exterior. The VIP first-class seat on this British Airways flight from London to New York had been a hard-won luxury, a testament to years of relentless work, shrewd decisions, and the unwavering ambition that had propelled her to the helm of Sterling Global Investments, a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm headquartered in Manhattan. At 45, Ava was a force to be reckoned with. Her sharp intellect, her commanding presence, and her impeccable style commanded respect in every boardroom she entered. She had shattered glass ceilings and navigated the treacherous currents of the financial world with a grace and steely determination that had earned her both admiration and envy in equal measure. This transatlantic flight was meant to be a brief respite, a chance to unwind before diving into a crucial round of negotiations that could potentially reshape the global energy market. She had deliberately chosen this late-night flight, hoping for a few hours of undisturbed sleep. The hefty price tag of the VIP suite, with its lie-flat bed and enhanced privacy, was an investment in her well-being, a necessary indulgence for a woman who routinely put in 18-hour days. She had settled in a glass of chilled champagne at her side. The ambient lighting dimmed the pre-flight announcements, fading into a distant hum. Then the disruption. It began with a nervous tap on her arm. A young, fair-haired flight attendant, barely out of her training uniform, stood beside her. Her face flushed with an uncomfortable mix of apology and anxiety. "Madam Sterling," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I am so sorry to disturb you, but there has been a slight issue." Ava lowered her noise-cancelling headphones, her brow furrowed. "An issue?" "Yes, ma'am," the flight attendant stammered. "A passenger in economy, plus Mr. Harrison. He has a severe back condition, and he has requested to be moved to a lie-flat seat for medical reasons. All the other first-class seats are occupied." Ava's initial reaction was one of annoyance. Medical issues should have been addressed before boarding. This felt like a last-minute inconvenience being foisted upon her. "And how does this concern me?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. The flight attendant shifted her weight, her gaze darting nervously towards the front of the cabin. "Well, ma'am, the purser has asked if you would be willing to move to another first-class seat to accommodate Mr. Harrison." Ava blinked, a slow burn of disbelief starting to simmer within her. The implication was clear. She, a black woman, occupying the most premium seat on the plane, was being asked to relinquish it for a white man who had made a late request. The medical reason felt flimsy, a convenient excuse. "Are you suggesting I downgrade my pre-booked, fully paid VIP suite because someone else didn't plan ahead?" Ava asked, her voice now edged with a steel that hinted at the power she wielded in her professional life. The flight attendant wrung her hands. "Ma'am, it's just for this flight. We can offer you a complimentary upgrade on your next British Airways flight." The offer felt insulting, a paltry attempt to placate her. This wasn't about the money or a future upgrade. It was about the principle. It was about the unspoken assumption that her comfort and her entitlements were somehow less valid. Before Ava could respond further, a crisply dressed purser, a man with a forced professional smile plastered on his face, approached their row. "Madam Sterling," he said, his tone oozing a condescending charm that Ava instantly recognized as disingenuous. "I do apologize for this slight inconvenience. However, we have a passenger with a genuine medical need, and as a valued customer, we were hoping you might show some understanding and flexibility in this rather unusual circumstance." The use of flexibility stung. It implied she was being unreasonable for expecting to occupy the seat she had paid for. The fact that he addressed her directly after sending a junior attendant spoke volumes. Ava looked around the hushed first-class cabin. Every other passenger was white. The realization hit her with a cold, sharp clarity. She was being singled out. A wave of humiliation washed over her, quickly followed by a surge of icy fury. This wasn't about a medical emergency. It was about privilege. It was about the ingrained societal bias that still, in this day and age, allowed some to feel entitled to take what others had rightfully earned. She took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. She could make a scene. She could assert her right's demand to speak to the captain, unleash the full force of her considerable influence. But something held her back. The weariness of a lifetime of having to fight these subtle, insidious battles settled upon her. She was tired. With a tight, controlled voice, Ava said, "Fine, I will move. But I expect a full refund for the difference in fare, and I will be in touch with British Airways customer relations upon my arrival." The purser's smile widened a mask of relief. "Of course, Madam Sterling. We appreciate your understanding immensely." His words felt like a dismissal. The junior flight attendant scurried to help her gather her belongings, her eyes downcast, seemingly aware of the injustice she was a part of. Ava followed her to another first-class seat, a standard lie-flat several rows back. It was comfortable, but the sense of violation lingered a bitter taste in her mouth. As she settled into the new seat, she glanced back towards the VIP suite she had just vacated. A white man, looking perfectly healthy, was being assisted into it by the purser, who was all smiles and solicitousness. The casual entitlement on the man's face was like a slap. Ava closed her eyes, the injustice of the situation burning within her. She had complied, but she had not forgotten. In the silence of the cabin, a decision began to solidify in her mind, a decision that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone on this flight. The 5 minutes that followed Ava's forced relocation were a study in controlled fury, masked by outward composure. While the other first-class passengers settled into their pre-sleep routines, oblivious to the small drama that had just unfolded, Ava Sterling quietly began to work. Her first action was to retrieve her phone from her handbag. Ignoring the offer of in-flight Wi-Fi, she had her own secure satellite connection. She navigated to her contacts. Her thumb hovered over the number for Alistair Davies, her chief operating officer at Sterling Global Investments, a man known for his unflappable efficiency and his absolute loyalty. The call connected on the second ring. "Alistair," Ava said, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel that he instantly recognized. "I need you to do something for me, immediately." "Of course, Ava. What is it?" Alistair's voice was crisp and professional, even at this late hour in London. "I'm on BA Flight 201 to New York, VIP Suite 1A. Approximately 10 minutes ago, the cabin crew requested that I vacate my seat for another passenger with a purported medical condition. I have been moved to 4K. There was a brief silence on the other end. Alistair knew Ava's meticulous travel preferences. He also understood the subtle, often unspoken biases that women, and particularly women of color, faced in the business world and beyond. Understood, Alistair said, his tone now hardening with concern. Do you require any immediate assistance? Not at this moment, Ava replied. However, I want you to pull the crew manifest for this flight. Every single name from the captain to the most junior steward. Once you have that, I want you to compile a comprehensive profile on each of them. Employment history, any publicly available social media, any, shall we say, notable incidents or commendations in their records. Consider it done, Alistair said, his efficiency kicking into high gear. Is there anything else? Yes, Ava continued, her voice gaining a sharper edge. I want you to contact Penelope Hayes at Global Aviation Risk Management. Inform her that I have experienced a deeply unsatisfactory and frankly discriminatory incident on this flight. Tell her I will be filing a formal complaint upon arrival. And Alistair, make sure she understands the level of my dissatisfaction. Penelope Hayes was a titan in the aviation consulting world, a woman whose firm was often brought in to conduct high-level reviews and recommend sweeping changes within airlines. Ava and Penelope had a long-standing professional relationship built on mutual respect. Understood completely, Ava, Alistair confirmed. Ava ended the call and closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep, steadying breath. This wasn't about a single uncomfortable flight. It was about the systemic issues that allowed such incidents to occur. It was about the subtle erosion of dignity, and she had the power to do something about it. Her next call was to her personal assistant, Sarah Chen, who was based in New York. Sarah, like Alistair, was fiercely loyal and exceptionally competent. Sarah, Ava said, her voice calm but firm. I need you to clear my schedule for the entire day tomorrow. Nothing is to take priority. And I want you to arrange a meeting for me, first thing in the morning, with the senior management at British Airways North America headquarters. Consider it done, Ms. Sterling, Sarah replied, her tone reflecting her implicit understanding that something significant had occurred. Ava leaned back in her seat, the hum of the aircraft now a backdrop to the storm brewing within her. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't made a scene. She had simply made a few phone calls, but those calls had set in motion a chain of events that would ripple through the airline. She glanced towards the front of the cabin again. The white passenger was now fully reclined in her VIP suite, seemingly asleep, a picture of oblivious comfort. The purser was nowhere in sight. The junior flight attendant was serving drinks further down the aisle, her movements tense and hurried. Ava allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. They had assumed her compliance meant her acquiescence. They had mistaken her silence for weakness. They were about to learn a very harsh lesson about the true price of privilege and the quiet power of a woman who knew her worth and was not afraid to use her voice. The next few hours would be long, but Ava Sterling was prepared to turn every minute of her fury into a meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed act of corporate karma. The remainder of the flight was uneventful on the surface. Ava feigned sleep, allowing her mind to race, meticulously outlining her strategy. Alistair's initial report came through via encrypted message just before the breakfast service began. It contained exactly what she had asked for: detailed profiles of the entire flight crew. As she scanned the documents on her secure tablet, a few names jumped out. A senior flight attendant, Margaret Davies, had a history of multiple customer complaints regarding dismissive and condescending behavior. The purser, Simon Hayes, no relation to Penelope, thankfully had a couple of minor disciplinary actions in his file related to breaches of protocol. The Captain Richard Thompson had a long and seemingly clean record, which only amplified his culpability in allowing the incident to escalate. And the junior flight attendant, Emily Carter, her youthful face looking anxious in her staff photo, had a completely clean record. Ava made a mental note of her name. Upon landing at JFK, Ava was met at the gate by a senior representative from British Airways North America, a flustered-looking man named David Chen, no relation to Sarah. He profusely apologized for any inconvenience and assured her that the airline was taking her complaint very seriously. He offered her a ride in a private car, which she accepted her silence, speaking volumes more than any angry outburst could have. Her meeting at the BA headquarters in Manhattan was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. David Chen, along with a visibly nervous head of customer relations, a woman named Eleanor Vance, greeted her. Ava listened patiently as they offered a litany of apologies-free flights and empty assurances of a thorough internal investigation. Then Ava spoke. Her voice was calm, measured, and utterly devoid of emotion, which made her words all the more impactful. "Mr. Chen, Ms. Vance," she began, "I appreciate your apologies, but frankly, they are insufficient. This was not a slight inconvenience. This was a blatant act of discrimination, fueled by prejudice and a shocking disregard for a paying customer." She laid out the facts, her tone precise and unwavering, detailing the sequence of events and the clear implication that her race had played a significant role in the crew's decision. She then presented excerpts from Alistair's report, highlighting the prior complaints against the senior flight attendant and the purser. This was not an isolated incident, Ava stated, her gaze locking onto Eleanor Vance. This is a reflection of a culture within your airline that allows such behavior to occur and seemingly to be tolerated. Then came the hammer blow. "Ms. Vance, Mr. Chen." Ava continued, her voice gaining a steely edge. Sterling Global Investments holds a significant portfolio, as you are likely aware. We frequently utilize private aviation, but when our personnel do fly commercially, British Airways has been a preferred carrier, due to its reputation for premium service. However, after the events of last night, I have serious concerns about recommending your airline to my executives and our employees. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. "Therefore," she said, her gaze now unwavering, "unless I see immediate and decisive action taken regarding the entire crew of BA Flight 201, I will be issuing an internal memo to Sterling Global's global workforce, recommending an immediate and permanent cessation of all business travel on British Airways. Furthermore, I will be re-evaluating our corporate partnerships and loyalty programs accordingly." The air in the room seemed to thicken. The potential financial ramifications of Ava's ultimatum were staggering. Sterling Global had thousands of employees who traveled frequently and in premium cabins. The loss of their business would be a significant blow to British Airways' bottom line. Eleanor Vance's face paled visibly. David Chen stammered, trying to interject. "Ms. Sterling, with all due respect, that is a rather drastic measure," he began. "We assure you we will conduct a full investigation." Ava cut him off, her voice like ice. "Mr. Chen, investigations take time. My company's travel policies change immediately. I need to see tangible action, not promises. The crew of that flight made a choice. Now British Airways must make one." She stood up, her presence radiating power and determination. "I expect to hear from your CEO, Mr. Sean Doyle, personally, within the next 24 hours, outlining the specific steps you will be taking. Otherwise, consider our business concluded." With that, Ava Sterling turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind two senior executives, reeling from the swift and decisive consequences of a junior crew's prejudiced actions. The descent into chaos for the crew of BA Flight 201 had just begun. News of Ava Sterling's ultimatum spread through the upper echelons of British Airways like wildfire, Sean Doyle, the airline's CEO, was indeed informed within the hour. The potential loss of a major corporate account like Sterling Global sent shockwaves through the executive team. An emergency meeting was convened, the gravity of the situation palpable. The initial reaction among some of the senior managers was one of disbelief and resentment. How could one disgruntled passenger, even a high-profile CEO, wield such power? There were murmurs of Ava being overly sensitive and playing the race card. However, the cold, hard reality of the potential financial fallout quickly silenced the dissenters. Alistair Davies, ever the efficient operator, had already begun compiling data on Sterling Global's annual spending with British Airways. The figures were staggering, running into the millions of dollars across all cabin classes. Losing that revenue, especially in a competitive market, was a prospect no airline could afford. Sean Doyle, a seasoned executive known for his calm demeanor in a crisis, personally reviewed Ava's complaint and Alistair's preliminary findings. He also listened to a recording of the initial exchange between Ava and the junior flight attendant Emily Carter, which had been captured by the aircraft's internal communication system. While the recording didn't explicitly reveal any racial bias, the sequence of events and the subsequent handling of the situation by the purser raised serious red flags. He also received Penelope Hayes's preliminary assessment, which painted a damning picture of the crew's mishandling of the situation and highlighted potential breaches of the airline's own customer service protocols. Penelope's reputation for impartiality and incisive analysis carried significant weight. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the very real threat of losing a major client, Sean Doyle knew that decisive action was required. He personally placed a call to Ava Sterling later that afternoon. Ava listened as the CEO offered his sincere apologies, acknowledging the airline's failure to meet her expectations and assuring her that a full and impartial investigation was underway. "Mr. Doyle," Ava said, her voice firm but less icy than her meeting with the North American executives. "Apologies are a start, but they are not enough. My concern is not just with my personal experience, but with the underlying culture that allowed it to happen. I need to see concrete steps taken to ensure that no other passenger faces similar treatment." Sean Doyle outlined the immediate actions he had authorized. The entire crew of BA Flight 201 had been temporarily suspended pending a thorough investigation. All customer-facing staff would undergo mandatory diversity and sensitivity training. Furthermore, the airline's policy on passenger upgrades and seat changes would be immediately reviewed and revised to prevent similar situations. Ava listened carefully, acknowledging the steps as positive first measures. However, she pressed him on the issue of accountability. "Mr. Doyle," she said, "while training is important, it does not address the specific actions of the crew members involved. Their behavior was unacceptable, and there must be consequences." Sean Doyle hesitated for a moment. "Ms. Sterling," he said, choosing his words carefully, "the investigation is ongoing, and disciplinary actions will be taken based on its findings. I can assure you that we take such matters extremely seriously." Ava understood his reluctance to commit to immediate firings without a formal investigation. However, she also knew that the lack of swift action would be perceived as a lack of genuine commitment. "Mr. Doyle," she said, her voice leaving no room for misinterpretation, "my recommendation to Sterling Global stands. I need to see demonstrable accountability. The silence of those who witnessed or facilitated this incident speaks volumes. Sometimes the price of silence is the loss of trust." The conversation ended with a tense understanding. British Airways was taking her demand seriously, but the ultimate fate of the crew hung in the balance. Meanwhile, the crew of BA Flight 201 were in a state of shock and disbelief. The purser, Simon Hayes, and the senior flight attendant, Margaret Davies, were particularly indignant. They felt they had acted in the best interests of a passenger with a medical need, and that Ava Sterling was overreacting. They downplayed the racial undertones, dismissing Ava as a difficult and entitled passenger. The junior flight attendant, Emily Carter, however, felt a growing unease. She had witnessed the subtle but undeniable way Ava had been treated, and a nagging feeling of injustice had been bothering her since the incident. She had remained silent, deferring to her senior colleagues, but now, with the investigation looming, she was starting to question her own complicity. The price of her silence, she was beginning to realize, might be higher than she had initially thought. The British Airways internal investigation into the incident on BA Flight 201 was swift and thorough, driven by the urgent need to appease Ava Sterling and mitigate the potential financial damage. The investigators interviewed each member of the cabin crew, as well as several first-class passengers who had witnessed parts of the exchange. Simon Hayes and Margaret Davies remained defiant, sticking to their story about prioritizing a passenger with a medical need. They portrayed Ava as an unreasonable and demanding individual who had made a mountain out of a molehill. They conveniently omitted the subtle pressure and assumptions that had underpinned their decision. Emily Carter's interview, however, painted a different picture. Initially hesitant and nervous, she eventually recounted the events with a growing sense of conviction. She described the purser's dismissive tone towards Ava, the unspoken assumption that the white passenger's request should take precedence, and her own discomfort with the situation. While she admitted to not speaking up at the time, her testimony corroborated Ava's account and exposed the underlying biases that had influenced the crew's actions. The investigators also reviewed the passenger manifest and Mr. Harrison's booking details. They discovered that he had not requested a lie-flat seat prior to boarding, and that his severe back condition was not documented with the airline. Further inquiries revealed that Mr. Harrison was a frequent flyer with silver status who had a habit of making last-minute requests for upgrades. The findings of the investigation were damning. While there was no explicit evidence of overt racism, the report concluded that the crew had demonstrated poor judgment, a lack of sensitivity, and a failure to adhere to the airline's customer service standards. The decision to ask Ava Sterling to relinquish her VIP suite was deemed to be based on a combination of flimsy justification and implicitly a deference to the white male passenger. Armed with these findings, Sean Doyle contacted Ava Sterling again. He informed her that the investigation had been concluded and that disciplinary actions were being taken. "Ms. Sterling," he said, his voice somber, "the findings of our investigation are clear. The actions of the purser, Mr. Hayes, and the senior flight attendant, Ms. Davies, were unacceptable. They have been terminated effective immediately." Ava listened without comment, a sense of grim satisfaction settling within her. It wasn't about personal vengeance. It was about accountability. "Captain Thompson," Doyle continued, "while not directly involved in the initial exchange, has been issued a formal reprimand for failing to intervene and ensure that the situation was handled appropriately. He will also undergo mandatory leadership sensitivity training." Then Doyle mentioned Emily Carter. The junior flight attendant, Ms. Carter, cooperated fully with the investigation and provided valuable testimony. While she acknowledged her initial silence, her honesty and remorse were evident. She will undergo additional customer service training and will be closely mentored. Ava finally spoke. "Mr. Doyle," she said, her voice softening slightly, "I appreciate the swift and decisive action you have taken. It demonstrates a genuine commitment to addressing this issue. While the experience was deeply unpleasant, I believe that your response is a positive step forward." She did not immediately retract her recommendation to Sterling Global. "I will, however, She continued, "Reevaluate our company's travel policy based on the long-term changes and training initiatives British Airways implements. I will be in touch with Penelope Hayes to discuss your proposed revisions to your upgrade and seating policies." The call ended on a more conciliatory note. British Airways had averted a major financial crisis, but the cost to the careers of the flight crew had been significant. News of the firing sent shockwaves through the airline industry. There were debates about fairness and due process, but the underlying message was clear: discriminatory behavior towards paying customers would not be tolerated, especially when it impacted major corporate accounts. Simon Hayes and Margaret Davies were outraged and vowed to fight their dismissals. They hired lawyers and launched public campaigns, claiming they were victims of a powerful CEO's vendetta. However, the documented evidence from the investigation, including Emily Carter's corroborating testimony, made their claims difficult to sustain. Emily Carter, meanwhile, grappled with the aftermath of her decision to speak out. While she had been spared termination, the atmosphere among some of her colleagues was icy. However, she also received messages of support from other junior staff who had long felt uncomfortable with the subtle biases that sometimes permeated the cabin crew culture. For Emily, the experience was a harsh lesson in the personal and professional consequences of both silence and speaking truth to power. The hard karma that was about to hit back, however, was something none of them saw coming, a twist in the tale that would further amplify the ripples of Ava Sterling's actions. The immediate aftermath of the BA Flight 201 incident saw a flurry of activity within British Airways and the wider aviation industry. Airlines around the world took note of the swift and decisive action taken by Sean Doyle, and many initiated internal reviews of their own customer service and diversity training protocols. The message from the Sterling Global incident was loud and clear: treating paying customers with disrespect, especially based on race or any other discriminatory factor, could have severe consequences. For Simon Hayes and Margaret Davies, the fight against their termination proved to be a losing battle. Their lawyers argued unfair dismissal, but the weight of the internal investigation's findings, coupled with the potential for further negative publicity, led British Airways to stand firm. Their careers in the airline industry were effectively over. Both struggled to find comparable employment, their reputations tarnished by the widely publicized incident. The karma of their prejudiced actions was beginning to bite. Emily Carter, despite facing some initial ostracism from her former allies, found unexpected support from within the airline. Many junior crew members, emboldened by the outcome of Ava Sterling's complaint, began to speak more openly about instances of bias they had witnessed or experienced. Emily became an accidental advocate for a more inclusive and respectful cabin crew culture. She was promoted within a year, her file now marked with commendations for her honesty and integrity during the investigation. The hard karma, however, was far more direct and ironic than the professional downfall of Simon and Margaret or the unexpected rise of Emily. Several months after the incident, Simon Hayes, now working a low-paying job at a call center, booked a budget airline flight for a short European vacation. Due to overbooking, he was informed at the gate that he would need to be moved to a different seat. The only available option was a middle seat in the very back row next to the lavatory. He protested vehemently, citing a bad back and demanding a more comfortable seat. The gate agent, weary and overworked, politely, but firmly explained that all other seats were occupied. Simon ironically found himself on the receiving end of a dismissive attitude and a complete lack of flexibility, his past behavior now mirroring the treatment he had meted out to Ava Sterling. As he squeezed into the uncomfortable middle seat, the full weight of his past actions crashed down upon him. Margaret Davies's karma was equally pointed. After struggling to find another job in the service industry, she eventually took a position as a personal assistant to a wealthy elderly woman known for her demanding and often imperious nature. Margaret, who had prided herself on her seniority and authority as a senior flight attendant, now found herself at the beck and call of someone who treated her with the same condescending tone she had often used with passengers she deemed less important. The irony was lost on no one who knew about her past. Meanwhile, Ava Sterling, having seen tangible changes implemented by British Airways, quietly lifted her internal recommendation against the airline. Sterling Global's employees were once again permitted to book BA flights. The financial impact of Ava's initial threat had been significant enough to force real and lasting change within the organization. Ava and Alistair continued to run Sterling Global with their characteristic drive and acumen. Ava, however, carried a new understanding of the power of her voice and the importance of holding even seemingly small acts of injustice to account. She also made a point of mentoring young women of color in her industry, ensuring they understood their worth and the importance of advocating for themselves. The story of BA Flight 201 became a cautionary tale within the business and travel sectors, a stark reminder that in an increasingly interconnected and socially aware world, discriminatory behavior would not go unnoticed or unpunished. The 5 minutes of fury Ava Sterling experienced at 30,000 feet had ultimately led to a reckoning that extended far beyond a single flight crew, proving that even the subtlest forms of prejudice can carry a very heavy price. The termination of the BA Flight 201 crew was not the end of the story. It was merely the end of the first chapter. In the 6 months that followed, the incident became a legend in the aviation industry, a cautionary tale whispered in crew lounges from Heathrow to Hong Kong. Within British Airways, Sean Doyle, under the watchful eye of his most valuable corporate client, had begun the slow, arduous process of implementing the promised cultural overhaul. Mandatory DEI training was rolled out, customer service protocols were rewritten, and a new zero-tolerance policy on discrimination was drilled into every employee. Ava Sterling, for her part, had resumed her demanding role at the helm of Sterling Global. She had honored her word, lifting the corporate travel advisory after seeing tangible evidence of the airline's commitment to change. She considered the matter closed, a painful but necessary battle that had been fought and won. But the world of public opinion is a fickle and dangerous beast, and the disgraced do not always fade quietly into the night. Simon Hayes and Margaret Davies, stripped of their careers and their social standing, were consumed by a bitter, seething resentment. In their minds, they were not perpetrators of prejudice. They were the victims of a vindictive, power-mad billionaire. They found a champion for their cause in Marcus Thorne, a notoriously aggressive and media-savvy lawyer who specialized in high-profile wrongful termination suits, particularly those he could frame as battles against corporate cancel culture. The first salvo was fired not in a courtroom, but on the nation's most watched cable news opinion show. Simon and Margaret sat on a plush sofa opposite a sympathetic host, their faces masks of carefully rehearsed victimhood. "We were just trying to help a passenger in medical distress," Simon said, his voice thick with emotion. "It was a chaotic situation, and we made a judgment call. This woman," he said, referring to Ava without naming her, "became irate. She was demanding, she was aggressive. We were just trying to maintain a safe and orderly cabin." Margaret, dabbing at her dry eyes, added, "I've given 25 years of my life to this airline. I've served celebrities, politicians, even royalty. To have my career destroyed because a billionaire didn't like being asked to move, it's just not right. We are being made an example of." The performance was brilliant in its dishonesty. They were the dedicated working-class crew, and Ava was the out-of-touch, imperious one-percenter. The narrative was simple, powerful, and it caught fire. The online commentary which had once praised Ava's stand now began to shift. She was accused of being a corporate Karen, of using her immense power to crush the little guy. A week later, the second salvo landed. Marcus Thorne filed a $50 million lawsuit against British Airways for wrongful termination, and in a bold and unprecedented move, he named Ava Sterling personally as a co-defendant, suing her for tortious interference and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Alistair Davies walked into Ava's office, his face grim, a copy of the legal filing in his hand. "They're not just coming for the airline, Ava," he said. "They're coming for you." Ava read the document, her expression a mask of cold, controlled fury. The lawsuit was a work of fiction, a tapestry of half-truths and outright lies designed to harass and intimidate. It was a classic Marcus Thorne strategy wage war in the media to force a quiet, lucrative settlement. "They think they can bully me into writing a check," Ava said, her voice dangerously quiet. "They have made a grave miscalculation." While Ava and her own formidable legal team prepared for the public battle, a quieter, more insidious war was being waged within the ranks of British Airways. Emily Carter, the junior flight attendant who had spoken the truth during the investigation, had been promoted to purser. Her rise was a direct result of her integrity, a clear signal from management that honesty was now a valued commodity. But for some of the veteran crew members, she was not a hero. She was a traitor. The harassment was subtle, a campaign of 1,000 small cuts. It was led by a senior flight attendant named Brenda, a close friend of the disgraced Margaret Davies. Brenda and her small clique of loyalists saw Emily as a snitch who had broken the unwritten code of the crew. They would forget to relay important messages to her during flights. They would leave her out of crew communications, causing her to miss important operational changes. They spread vicious rumors about her in the crew lounge, suggesting she had embellished her story to curry favor with management and win her promotion. Emily found herself isolated the camaraderie of the crew, which she had once cherished, replaced by a wall of icy hostility. She was doing her job with impeccable professionalism, a living embodiment of the airline's new standards, but she was being punished for it by the resentful ghosts of the old regime. The internal strife reached Penelope Hayes, the aviation consultant, through her network of contacts. She immediately called Ava. "Ava," she said, her voice full of concern, "I'm hearing whispers of a problem at BA. The young flight attendant, Carter. The old guard is making her life hell. The new policies are in place, but it seems the culture is fighting back." Ava hung up the phone, a heavy sigh escaping her lips. The Battle of BA Flight 201 was not over. It was being fought on two fronts: a loud public war in the courts and the media, and a quiet, secret war in the galleys and crew lounges at 30,000 feet. She had fired the crew, but she now realized that dismantling the culture they represented was a far more difficult and dangerous task. The new storm was here, and she was at its center. The legal battle became a grueling, high-stakes game of chess. Marcus Thorne, true to form, waged his war in the press, feeding a steady stream of leaks and sound bites to sympathetic media outlets. He painted a picture of Simon and Margaret as dedicated professionals who had been sacrificed to the whims of an unstable and vindictive billionaire. He demanded access to Ava's personal travel records, her corporate expense reports, anything he could use to portray her as a wasteful, out-of-touch elitist. Ava's legal team, led by one of New York's most formidable litigators, a woman named Clara Reed, met his aggression with a wall of calm, methodical precision. They refused to engage in the public mudslinging, focusing instead on the legal facts of the case. The centerpiece of their strategy was the deposition of Ava Sterling. The deposition took place in a sterile conference room in Thorne's law office. It was a tense psychological battle that lasted for 8 grueling hours. Marcus Thorne was at his most menacing, his questions, a barrage of insinuations and personal attacks. "Ms. Sterling," he began, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "is it true that your company, Sterling Global, is worth an estimated $10 billion? "My company's valuation is a matter of public record," Ava replied, her voice cool and even. "So you are, it's fair to say, a woman of immense power and influence," Thorne pressed. "I am the CEO of a successful company, yes. A company with the power to, say, crush the careers of 2 working-class flight attendants over a minor seating dispute," he asked, leaning forward. "My company has the power to demand a certain standard of service and safety from its vendors." Ava countered, her gaze unwavering. "When that standard is breached, we take appropriate action. This was not about a seating dispute. This was about an employee who chose to believe the unsubstantiated claim of a white passenger over the valid ticketed-in-hand status of a black passenger, and then refused to de-escalate the situation. Thorne tried to trip her up, to provoke her into an angry outburst he could use in court. He questioned her motives, her emotional state, her interpretation of events. But Ava was unshakable. She was a fortress of facts, her testimony a calm, devastating recitation of the events, her composure absolute. While the legal battle raged in public, Emily Carter was fighting her own quiet war in private. The bullying from Brenda's clique had escalated. On a flight to Dubai, a false report was filed against her, accusing her of being rude to a first-class passenger. The accusation was baseless and quickly disproven by the passenger himself, but the intent was clear: to tarnish her perfect record, to wear her down. Emily was on the verge of quitting. The stress was becoming unbearable. She confided in a trusted senior purser, a man who was a vocal champion of the airline's new culture. He urged her not to resign. "That's what they want, Emily," he said. "Don't let them win. Use the system. Trust the system." With his encouragement, Emily made a decision. She spent a week meticulously documenting every incident of harassment, every whispered threat, every act of professional sabotage. She then filed a formal confidential complaint through the new, robust internal grievance system that Ava had insisted British Airways create. The response was immediate and decisive. The airline's newly empowered and independent HR investigations unit, a team that now reported directly to the CEO's office, launched a full-scale covert investigation. They interviewed other crew members, reviewed internal communications, and uncovered a clear, coordinated pattern of bullying and harassment led by Brenda. While this was happening, Ava's legal team made a breakthrough. They located and contacted Mr. Harrison, the man who had been given Ava's VIP seat. He was a mid-level executive who, it turned out, was deeply ashamed of his role in the incident. He admitted in a sworn videotaped affidavit that he had only a minor backache, not a severe medical condition. He confessed that the purser, Simon Hayes, had been the one to suggest he play it up to secure the upgrade. He stated for the record that he had felt the crew was treating Ava unfairly, and that he had been too intimidated by the purser to speak up. The affidavit was a silver bullet. It completely destroyed Simon and Margaret's central claim that they had been acting out of medical necessity. It proved they had lied, conspired, and orchestrated the entire event. The two plot lines converged with devastating force. Faced with Mr. Harrison's irrefutable testimony and the discovery of their coordinated media lies, Marcus Thorne knew he was beaten. He quietly withdrew the lawsuit, leaving Simon and Margaret with nothing but a mountain of legal bills and their reputations in tatters. Simultaneously, the British Airways investigation concluded. Brenda and the 3 other crew members involved in the harassment campaign against Emily Carter were called into a meeting at the corporate headquarters. They were not met by a CEO, but by a team of HR professionals and lawyers. They were presented with a thick file of evidence detailing their actions. They were terminated for cause for violating the company's new zero-tolerance policy on workplace bullying. The system had worked. A week later, Ava sat in her office, a quiet sense of satisfaction settling over her. The wars were over. The public battle had been won through truth, and the private one had been won through the very system she had championed. She picked up the phone and made a call. "Emily Carter, please." When Emily came on the line, her voice was full of a new, confident energy. "Ms. Sterling, hello?" "Emily," Ava said, her voice warm and full of respect. "I've just been informed of the outcome of your case. I wanted to call you personally and tell you how incredibly proud I am of your courage. You trusted the process, and you stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. You are the very embodiment of the integrity we are trying to build." She then made an offer. "I am endowing a new annual award at British Airways to be given to a crew member who demonstrates exceptional courage and integrity in the workplace. It will be called the Emily Carter Integrity in Service Award. And I would be honored if you would be its first recipient." Emily was speechless, her tears of gratitude a quiet testament to her own long, difficult journey. The price of her truth had been high, but the reward was a validation of her character that was more valuable than any promotion. For Ava, the victory was complete. It wasn't just in punishing the guilty, it was in celebrating and elevating the hero. The termination of the BA Flight 201 crew was not the end of the story. It was merely the end of the first chapter. In the 6 months that followed, the incident became a legend in the aviation industry, a cautionary tale whispered in crew lounges from Heathrow to Hong Kong. Within British Airways, Sean Doyle, under the watchful eye of his most valuable corporate client, had begun the slow, arduous process of implementing the promised cultural overhaul. Mandatory DEI training was rolled out, customer service protocols were rewritten, and a new zero-tolerance policy on discrimination was drilled into every employee. Ava Sterling, for her part, had resumed her demanding role at the helm of Sterling Global. She had honored her word, lifting the corporate travel advisory after seeing tangible evidence of the airline's commitment to change. She considered the matter closed, a painful but necessary battle that had been fought and won. But the world of public opinion is a fickle and dangerous beast, and the disgraced do not always fade quietly into the night. Simon Hayes and Margaret Davies, stripped of their careers and their social standing, were consumed by a bitter, seething resentment. In their minds, they were not perpetrators of prejudice. They were the victims of a vindictive, power-mad billionaire. They found a champion for their cause in Marcus Thorne, a notoriously aggressive and media-savvy lawyer who specialized in high-profile wrongful termination suits, particularly those he could frame as battles against corporate cancel culture. The first salvo was fired not in a courtroom, but on the nation's most-watched cable news opinion show. Simon and Margaret sat on a plush sofa opposite a sympathetic host, their faces masks of carefully rehearsed victimhood. "We were just trying to help a passenger in medical distress," Simon said, his voice thick with emotion. "It was a chaotic situation, and we made a judgment call. This woman," he said, referring to Ava without naming her, became irate. She was demanding, she was aggressive. We were just trying to maintain a safe and orderly cabin." Margaret, dabbing at her dry eyes, added, "I've given 25 years of my life to this airline. I've served celebrities, politicians, even royalty. To have my career destroyed because a billionaire didn't like being asked to move, it's just not right. We are being made an example of." The performance was brilliant in its dishonesty. They were the dedicated working-class crew, and Ava was the out-of-touch, imperious one-percenter. The narrative was simple, powerful, and it caught fire. The online commentary, which had once praised Ava's stand, now began to shift. She was accused of being a corporate Karen, of using her immense power to crush the little guy. A week later, the second salvo landed. Marcus Thorne filed a $50 million lawsuit against British Airways for wrongful termination, and in a bold and unprecedented move, he named Ava Sterling personally as a co-defendant, suing her for tortious interference and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Alistair Davies walked into Ava's office, his face grim, a copy of the legal filing in his hand. "They're not just coming for the airline, Ava," he said. "They're coming for you." Ava read the document, her expression a mask of cold, controlled fury. The lawsuit was a work of fiction, a tapestry of half-truths and outright lies designed to harass and intimidate. It was a classic Marcus Thorne strategy wage war in the media to force a quiet, lucrative settlement. "They think they can bully me into writing a check," Ava said, her voice dangerously quiet. "They have made a grave miscalculation." While Ava and her own formidable legal team prepared for the public battle, a quieter, more insidious war was being waged within the ranks of British Airways. Emily Carter, the junior flight attendant who had spoken the truth during the investigation, had been promoted to purser. Her rise was a direct result of her integrity, a clear signal from management that honesty was now a valued commodity. But for some of the veteran crew members, she was not a hero. She was a traitor. The harassment was subtle, a campaign of 1,000 small cuts. It was led by a senior flight attendant named Brenda, a close friend of the disgraced Margaret Davies. Brenda and her small clique of loyalists saw Emily as a snitch who had broken the unwritten code of the crew. They would forget to relay important messages to her during flights. They would leave her out of crew communications, causing her to miss important operational changes. They spread vicious rumors about her in the crew lounge, suggesting she had embellished her story to curry favor with management and win her promotion. Emily found herself isolated, the camaraderie of the crew, which she had once cherished, replaced by a wall of icy hostility. She was doing her job with impeccable professionalism, a living embodiment of the airline's new standards, but she was being punished for it by the resentful ghosts of the old regime. The internal strife reached Penelope Hayes, the aviation consultant, through her network of contacts. She immediately called Ava. "Ava," she said, her voice full of concern, "I'm hearing whispers of a problem at BA. The young flight attendant, Carter. The old guard is making her life hell. The new policies are in place, but it seems the culture is fighting back." Ava hung up the phone, a heavy sigh escaping her lips. The battle of BA Flight 201 was not over. It was being fought on two fronts, a loud public war in the courts and the media, and a quiet secret war in the galleys and crew lounges at 30,000 feet. She had fired the crew, but she now realized that dismantling the culture they represented was a far more difficult and dangerous task. The new storm was here, and she was at its center. Ava Sterling had earned her place, not just in a VIP seat on an airplane, but in the upper echelons of the global business world. But her story is a powerful reminder that true power lies not just in wealth or status, but in the courage to stand up against injustice, even in its most subtle forms. The crew of BA Flight 201 made a costly misjudgment, underestimating the quiet determination of a woman who knew her worth. Their prejudiced actions unleashed a storm of corporate karma, proving that in today's world, silence in the face of discrimination has a steep price. Ava's story is a testament to the fact that one person armed with conviction and the will to act can indeed make a difference and hold even powerful institutions accountable. If this story of swift justice and the consequences of prejudice resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who believes in standing up for what's right, and be sure to subscribe for more compelling real-life stories of drama twists and hard-hitting karma.